Welcome to JD's Prep. In this problem, we are given a scenario regarding a local dog shelter. It tells us that each day a local dog shelter spends an average of $2.40 on food per dog. The manager estimates the shelter's daily expenses, assuming there is at least one dog in the shelter, using the function e of x equals 30 plus 2.40x. And we are given four statements regarding the function e of x. And we want to know which one of those four statements are correct, or which of the four statements are correct. The first statement says the variable x represents the number of dogs at the shelter per day. The second statement says that the variable x represents the number of volunteers at the shelter per day. The third statement says 30 represents the shelter's total expenses per day. And the fourth statement says 30 represents the shelter's non-food expenses per day. This problem is all about understanding the scenario that's given to us in the word problem and knowing what the different parts of the equation that we're given, the function e of x, represent. When you're reading through the statements, you can always go back to the original problem and see if you can make things match up. One of the first things that should jump out at you when you're comparing the four statements to the word problem itself is in number 2, where they talk about the number of volunteers in the shelter. If we look back up in the word problem, there is nothing at all up there that says anything about volunteers. Since the problem isn't giving us any information about volunteers, our variable is not going to represent the number of volunteers at the shelter. Everything in the function is going to be representing something that is described in the problem. So right away, we can rule out number 2. The other statement about the variable, number 1, says that the variable represents the number of dogs at the shelter per day. And if we look at the function itself, we have this 2.40 times x. Since the function is measuring the shelter's daily expenses, this means that whatever x represents, the expenses are going to be $2.40 times whatever x represents. If we look elsewhere in the problem, the $2.40 is mentioned up in the first sentence, which says that the shelter expects to spend $2.40 on food per dog. The per dog in particular gives us a clue that every dog in that shelter is going to cost $2.40 for food that day. And so that means then that our variable x represents the number of dogs. Because if there is one dog, then the shelter is going to spend $2.40 on food for that dog. If there are 2 dogs, then that will be $2.40 times 2, spending $2.40 for each of those dogs. And this will be true no matter how many dogs are at that local dog shelter. So the first statement about the variable number 1, that x represents the number of dogs at the shelter per day, is true. And in that statement where they said that they spend $2.40 on food per dog each day, that's all about the food costs for the shelter. So this expression here, the $2.40 times x, that's going to be our food costs per day. With the function being described to us, the e of x, we are told that the manager is estimating the shelter's daily expenses with that function, e of x. So the function itself, as a whole, the entire 30 plus 2.40 times x, that whole function is representing the total daily expenses for the shelter. And so if we look at number 3 here, number 3 is saying that 30 represents the shelter's total expenses per day. But e of x, the entire function, the entire 30 plus 2.40x, that entire thing represents the total expenses, not just the 30. So we can rule out number 3 as well. That leaves us with our E of x, which we said was the total cost per day, and 2.40 times x being our food costs. That suggests then that 30 will be our non-food costs. And the last statement down at the bottom, number 4, claims that 30 represents the shelter's non-food expenses per day, which is correct. So the two statements regarding the function E of x that are correct here are, number 1, telling us that the variable represents the number of dogs at the shelter per day, which we got from that first sentence, which said that $2.40 were spent on food per dog. And then the last statement, where 30 represents the shelter's non-food expenses per day. So the correct choice for this problem is number 2, 1, and 4.